Morning. Beautiful day, is it not?
Yes.
Kind of excited about this week and potential 40, 50 degree weather we might be getting. I'm glad you're here today. It's a good day. It's also the first day that we're beginning this kind of new mini-series for our sermons. We're going to be talking about the faith of our fathers, the faith of those who have come before us, and what that means and what that looks like and how that applies to us today. The Word of God was not just written thousands of years ago just to stay relevant only for thousands of years ago. It is filled with people and events and things that they experienced that we would do very, very well to learn from. This week, as you can tell, we're going to be talking about David. David is considered the great king. Ask any Jew, especially back in the time when the Bible was being written, David is what everyone aspires to. All the best kings are compared to David. David is the chosen one. I mean, everything focuses in on him. And even today, we tend to put him on this pedestal, as though he was some sort of superhuman. Like he had some kind of supernatural type faith that nothing could ever dent or mar or damage or anything. But that's not the case. See, David was a human. And on top of that, he was a very emotional human. Read through any of the Psalms, you'll see, he's kind of cranky. But he felt things deeply. So what's this secret? What's the secret that David had to remain as faithful as he did despite the things that he went through? Now, he may have been king over Israel, but he had a lot of really horrible things happen to him. Read through 1st and 2nd Samuel. Just skim through it. David was constantly having terrible things happen in his life. And we're going to be talking about those things today and how he handled it. Sometimes it was people on the outside. David hadn't done anything wrong, but someone on the outside was out to wreck him. Sometimes the trials that he went through was as a direct result of his sin. And other times, the trials came as the result of things that he had done in the past. Everyone here today has had trials. Everyone here today will have trials in the future. You will have things that you have to deal with. And sometimes they'll be very easy things. And sometimes they will be world-ending things. And the question is, how are we going to handle those things? How are we going to deal with those things when they come up? how David lived his life in trial, I want you to take special note of how he reacted to them. We like to say, yes, especially in today's time and in today's society, that we need to always be proactive and plan ahead and make sure that we're always on top of things. Sometimes things will happen that you can't plan for. Sometimes your only decision is how you will react. Before David was king, he was one of Saul's greatest advocates. He was one of King Saul's most loyal followers. And after he kills Goliath and starts fighting with the army and all these things, people start singing. Because they're just overjoyed. Israel is back on top. They're defeating their enemies. And so they start singing, and they're singing, Saul has killed his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Saul does not take this very well. Now notice, they're not insulting Saul. They're praising him. They're saying, Saul's killed his thousands. He's done great things. And look at all that David's done. He's killed tens of thousands. I mean, they're praising the king, and they're also praising one of the king's best servants, because that's how David sees himself. But Saul loses it. And so he tries to pin David to a wall with a spear. He chases him across the countryside. He gets his army behind him and starts chasing him all over. David hadn't done anything to Saul. In fact, he specifically tells Saul, you have nothing to fear from me. You're the Lord's anointed king. I'm not going to touch you. But Saul wasn't taking it. And so he murderously chases one of his strongest advocates until he chases him into a cave. And he doesn't realize that David's in this cave. And so Saul leaves his army inside so he can go into the cave and relieve himself. And David and his men are hiding there, and they see this happen. They see Saul standing there by himself. And his men tell him, this is the day that God told you that you would be able to take vengeance on your enemies. Now's the time. You need to do this. And so in 1 Samuel chapter 24, starting in verse 3, is where this story picks up. And Saul goes into the cave, and David's men say, this is the day that the Lord said he would deliver your enemies. And David rose, and he secretly cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Seems pretty innocuous to us. He didn't kill him. But in verse 5 we read, now it happened afterward that David's heart troubled him because he had cut Saul's robe. Saul has tried to pin him to the wall with a spear. He's chased him around the countryside. He's trying to murder him. And David feels bad because he cut his robe. Because he disrespected the king. So in verse 6 we pick up, and David said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, and stretch my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. So David restrained his servants with these words, and did not allow them to rise against Saul. And Saul got up from the cave and went on his way. David also arose afterward, went out to the cave, and called out to Saul, saying, my lord the king. And when David looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed down. So not only does David feel bad for doing this, he goes out to apologize to the man who's chasing around the country trying to murder. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, 'Indeed, David seeks you harm'? Look, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord delivered you today into my hand in the cave. And someone urged me to kill you. But my eyes spared you, and I said, I will not stretch out my hand against the Lord, against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Moreover, my father, see, yes, the corner of your robe in my hand. For in that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, know and see that there is neither evil nor rebellion in my hand, and I have not sinned against you. Yet you hunt my life to take it. Let the Lord be judge between you and me, and let the Lord avenge me upon you. But my hand shall not be against you." Keep in mind, David has already been anointed king by Samuel. By all legal rights, he probably could have gone ahead and taken over the kingdom. But this is not where David's heart is. David remains with a heart that is humble. He remains with a heart that says, this is not my place, this is God's place. How many times do we find ourselves being either insulted or cut off on the freeway or fill in the blank? We say, I need to get them. I mentioned before that when I was younger, I had a real bad road rage problem. Took me years to get past it. And this was not like your minor honking. This is like yelling, calling them too close, cutting them back off. I was a mean driver when I was younger. I remember being insulted once and deciding that wasn't going to fly. Part of getting past what others do to us is recognizing that our pride is really in the way. When we're willing to put whatever has come against us aside and say, this is not mine to deal with, this is God's to deal with. When we're willing to humble ourselves and say, okay, I realize that in most situations, most people would lay this guy out, but I'm not going to. When we stop seeking vengeance, when we stop seeking our own justice and release that to God's justice, we'll very likely find ourselves with a much greater peace than we would have otherwise. And so eventually, God does take care of Saul. Saul dies in battle. David said, It's not my place to take vengeance against the Lord's anointed. That is God's deal. God dealt with it eventually. And David became king. Unfortunately, one of the difficulties about having a humble heart is keeping a humble heart. Especially when you're in a position of power. And so David becomes king, and when it's time for all the other kings to go off to war, because it's kind of a seasonal thing, David says, I'm going to stay home, y'all take care of it. And he saw Bathsheba. Another very well-known piece of David's life that we're very familiar with. Now, Bathsheba is innocent here. Right? She's doing what normal people do. The king has a lot of power. So David takes Bathsheba. She sends him word later saying, hey, I'm pregnant. There's a problem. And so we all know David brings her husband Uriah back. And this isn't some random soldier. This is one of David's mighty men. David knows who this guy is. He's got to. But he brings him, he tries to trick him into going home and sleeping with his wife, so that when the baby comes, he'll just say, oh, it's mine. But it doesn't work. And it doesn't even work when David gets him drunk and tries to do the same thing. And so David sends him with a note. Uriah doesn't know what it says. But the note is to the commander of the army, and it says, put Uriah at the front, and when the fighting is fiercest, everyone move away so that he'll get killed. So he sends Uriah carrying his own death notice and murders him. And he thinks he's gotten away with it. And then Nathan the prophet shows up. He tells David this parable about a man who had one sheep that he loved and cared for, and another man who had just herds of flocks. But when a visitor came, he stole the man's one sheep that he cared for. He stole it, and he killed it, and he fed it. And David says, that man should die! And Nathan says, you're the man. And so in 2 Samuel, we turn to chapter 12. Nathan tells David in verse 9, why have you despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in his sight? You have killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword. You have taken his wife to be your wife, and have killed him with the sword of the people of Ammon. Now therefore, the sword shall never depart from your house, because you have despised me, and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up adversity against you from your own house. And I will take your wives before your eyes, and give them to your neighbor. And he shall lie with your wives in the sight of his son, for you did this secretly. But I will do this thing before all Israel, before the sun. And David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. This is a pretty heavy punishment. This is not small. This is not small. We're going to see later how this comes back and how this punishment is carried out. What's the first step in any sort of program to help you get past something? What's the very first step? Admit the fact that what you've done or what you're doing is wrong. Accept the fact that we've messed up. And that's what David's done. He doesn't say, oh, well, I was feeling lonely. Oh, well, it was just a blip. Oh, that's not really a thing. I just kind of messed up a little, but that's not a problem anymore. No, David says, I've sinned against the Lord. Continuing verse 13. Nathan said to David, the Lord also has put away your sin. You shall not die. However, because by this deed you have given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, the child who also is born to you shall surely die. Then Nathan departed to his house. This is the rest of the punishment. David has two things coming at him. One will be in the future. Someone from his own household is going to come against him. And the second is, this child will perish. David has a choice to make at this point. He has a choice whether to say, you know what? Forget God. If he's going to do this to me, I'll do it on my own. Or he has a choice to accept the consequences and follow God anyway. This is the choice everyone will make at some point. Whether we will follow God regardless of what is happening, or whether we give up and walk away. This is what David does, starting in the second part of verse 15. The Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife bore to David, and became ill. David therefore pleaded with God for the child, and David fasted and went in and lay all night on the ground. So the elders of his house arose and went to him to raise him up from the ground, but he would not, nor did he eat food with them. Then on the seventh day it came to pass that the child died. And the servants of David were afraid to tell him that the child was dead. For they said, indeed, while the child was alive, we spoke to him, and he would not heed our voice. How can we tell him that the child is dead? He may do some harm. His servants are literally worried about where David's going to go from here. Verse 19, when David saw that his servants were whispering, David perceived that the child was dead. Therefore, David asked his servants, is the child dead? They said, yes. So David arose from the ground, washed and anointed himself, and changed his clothes, and he went into the house of the Lord and worshipped. Then he went to his own house, and when he requested, they set food before him, and he ate. Then his servants said to him, What is this you've done? You've got this backwards. You fasted and wept for the child while he was alive, but when the child died, you arose and ate food. And he said, while the child was alive, I fasted and wept. For I said, who can tell whether the Lord may be gracious to me and the child may live? But now he is dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. David had to decide whether to accept what had happened and begin to move forward with his life, or to reject God after one of the greatest horrors he could have faced. It's around this time that David writes the 51st Psalm. And this is his, as far as I can tell from the context, this is David's response to the horror that is his life right now. Verse 1 and 2. Have mercy upon me, O God, according to your loving kindness, according to the multitude of your tender mercies. Blot out my transgressions, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, and cleanse me from my sin. starting in verse 10. We know this from a song. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me away from your presence, and do not take away your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and uphold me by your generous spirit. Then I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners shall be converted to you. David doesn't stop. He doesn't stop in the horror. He begins to move forward. And he begins by asking God to restore him. He knows that he can't do it on his own. Do we know that we can't do it on our own? When our life is shattered, when things are destroyed, when we have nothing but the blackness of horror facing us, are we willing to turn to God and say, restore me? I cannot do it myself. David has chosen, because this is a choice, regardless of what he's feeling, he has chosen to worship God no matter what, to rely on him no matter what, and to have faith that God will restore him no matter what. Sometime later, the other part of the punishment comes. And his son, Absalom, overthrows the kingdom. This wasn't done on a whim. This is something that Absalom spent months plotting and preparing and getting people on his side. This has been something that's been festering for a while. And it gets to the point where David literally has to flee Jerusalem, or him and all his men will be killed by his own son. David writes a psalm at this point too. He writes the third psalm. Before he does that, a man named Shimei sees David and his men going down the road. And he starts cursing David. Insulting him, cursing. He's throwing rocks at him. He's throwing dirt at him. This guy hates David. And David's men say, David, this guy's really annoying. Can we still kill him? He's insulting the Lord's anointed. Can we go kill him now? David says, no, you can't. He says, who knows if God has sent him to do this, to put me in my place. This goes back to how he reacted to Saul, if you remember. He didn't allow his pride to get in the way of following God no matter what, and trusting that God would handle it. And so while he's fleeing from Absalom, he writes the third psalm where he writes, Lord, how they have increased who trouble me. Many are they who rise up against me. Many are they who say of me, there is no help for him in God. But you, O Lord, are a shield for me, my glory, and the one who lifts up my head. I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he heard me from his holy hill. I lay down and slept. I awoke, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me all around. Arise, O Lord, Save me, O my God, for you have struck all my enemies on the cheekbone. You have broken the teeth of the ungodly. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing is on your people. This is David's life in response to all that he's worked for, all that he's done, all that he's built up, being stripped away from it. He can't fight this on his own. He can't make this on his own. And so he turns to God. Later on, Absalom is killed in battle. David is restored to the throne. And Shimei shows up again. And he comes before David and he says, I'm sorry. He says, take my life if you want to take it. David says, why would I do that? What good would that bring? The great secret, which really shouldn't be a secret, is that David chose to follow God regardless of what was going on, regardless of what others said, regardless of what his emotions may have said. He chose to follow God. We are no different in our ability to make a choice. I said several weeks ago, I made the point that a marriage is not built on emotions. A marriage is built on a choice. To stick with your spouse no matter what. Our relationship with God is the same. It is built on a choice on how we will act, on what we're going to do. There may be days where you wake up in the morning and you say, nope. You got to turn around and go back to sleep. Sometimes that's all we can do. Sometimes we will have to make a choice on whether we are going to take our own vengeance or let it slide again. There will be days where we know the truth and must choose how to act on it. We know the truth. We know where we are headed. We know what God has in store for us ultimately. If we allow our emotions to dictate whether or not we will follow God, we will find it very difficult to follow God. Now, please let me make something very clear. It is fine. It is healthy to have emotions. If we were not supposed to have emotions, I don't think God would have put emotions in us. We can be sad and terrified and horrified. We can have fear and anger. Jesus was angry, so angry that he did what? Flipped over the tables, whipped the animals out, threw people out of the temple courts. Probably twice, maybe more. It is okay to be upset. It is okay to not know what you're feeling. You've been there too, where you just don't know what to feel. But the point where it all comes together is how we will choose to act. The choices that we will make on whether or not we will follow the one who can restore us. Whether we will follow the one who can bring us back whole again. So we can't do it on our own. We might try. A lot of people do. But humbling ourselves, taking away our pride, and laying ourselves before God and saying, I don't know. Restore me. Bring me to you again. That's where we begin healing. That's where we begin the journey closer to Him. I doubt David woke up after writing the 51st Psalm and was never sad again after that about what happened. I doubt David wrote the 3rd Psalm and then woke up the next morning, everything's going to be fine, I'm going to be great again. But it was the point where we start, where we say, my life is yours. You're the only one that can restore me. You're the only one that can make me whole. You're the only one that can get me through this in the first place. There are people here hurting and having difficulty and having struggles and trials. If you know who they are, they need encouragement. If you're someone who's very good at keeping it in and not letting it out, don't try to do it on your own. It won't work. Let people know. More importantly, let God know. He already knows anyway. So getting it out there and saying, you're the one, will help get you started. If you're not His child and He wants you to become His child and become part of this family of His, who is the body of Christ in baptism, so that we can help you, so that we can help each other, so that we can rely on Him for the restoration that we so desperately need. And if we can help you with that, let us know as we stand.